From the Radio Cafe and the Quivira Coalition, you're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. And today we're going to be talking to a photographer who's made an extraordinarily beautiful book about rangelands and the land stewards who work and care for the land, and also to two of the land stewards who participated in the book. That's right after this brief announcement. Quivira Coalition's new Agrarian program is accepting applications for the 2024 season from November 1st until December 15th, or once all positions are filled. Apprenticeships take place on working ranches and farms practicing regenerative agriculture across the Intermountain West. These 8-month full-time paid apprenticeships include housing and will allow apprentices to be fully immersed in the work of an operation. Program support includes in-person gatherings, an education stipend, educational Zoom calls, one-on-one check-ins, and networking opportunities to kickstart a career in regenerative agriculture. Apprenticeships begin in March and April and run through November 2024. You can learn more at quiviracoalition.org/new agrarian, and Quivira is Quivira. I'd like now to welcome Sally Thomson. She's an artist, a photographer, and her new book is called Homeground, which we're going to be talking about today. And we're also joined by Julie Sullivan, who is a rancher with George Whitten at San Juan Ranch, and she is head of mentor training and support for the new Agrarian program for the Quivira Coalition. And Nancy Ranney, who manages Ranney Ranch near Corona, New Mexico, and she is on the board of the Quivira Coalition and the Southwest Grassfed Livestock Alliance. Welcome, everybody, to Down to Earth.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is an absolutely beautiful book of photographs and texts about ranching and grassland ecosystems here in the Southwest. And it really struck me, looking at this book of photographs, how important it is for an artist to understand what she's looking at in order to make a photograph that has real depth. And I wondered if you could talk, Sally, about how you got into this whole world of ranching and land use and rangelands, and how that informs the way you work.
Well, I have a background in landscape architecture and land use planning and conservation work, not necessarily in ranching, but I've spent most of my career involved in conservation work. And so when I moved to New Mexico in 2011 permanently, I couldn't wait to get out on the rangelands and discover what this land was about.
Where did you move from?
I moved from North Carolina, so most of my youth and my years have been spent on the East Coast. Although we started moving out to this direction back in probably the 1980s, but didn't move here permanently until 2011. So when I moved here, the first thing I did was I tried to be in touch with folks that were out ranching and trying to find out what was going on. And I contacted the Southwest Grassfed Livestock Alliance, and it so happened that they were looking for somebody to document the holistic management work that they were doing. And so I worked with them, and Nancy actually was on the board of SWGLA at that time. And I went out to a number of different ranches in New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona to document this work that they were doing. And I just found it fascinating. So over the years, I continued to do other work, but my interest in rangelands was sparked, and I just kept continuing doing this work.
Nancy, I was wondering if you could talk about the role of grasslands for the health of Western ecosystems. What do grasslands do? I mean, they're kind of ignored when we talk about conservation. There's a lot of conversation about forests and wetlands, not as much about grasslands. But what do they do for wildlife, livestock, and all the people who rely on them?
Well, this is a wonderful area, and it's a new one. And increasingly, grasslands are being recognized as hugely important to the health of our larger ecosystem. And one thing that Sally's book does show in that lovely map she has is grasslands are over a third of our country's land mass. In fact, they're over a third of the land mass in the world. So they're a hugely important ecosystem. And what has been discovered is that the potential for retaining carbon is immense, also for infiltrating water. And we know that those are two of our major problems in the world today, our loss of carbon and also our depletion of our groundwater resources. So the key is that these lands need to be well managed. And this approach to ranching, historically, it's how the Native Americans in this country worked on the land and how the buffalo, who lived here in great numbers, managed the land, which was to graze them, move across them, and then give them plenty of time to recover. So there is an amazing seed bank, fortunately, still in our nation's grasslands, which, if allowed to come back, can be strong. So many of us working with this have seen remarkable recovery on our own places. Julie can speak to this too. But we started on our ranch implementing regenerative grazing techniques in 2002. And within 3 years, we saw an amazing difference. And if you were to replicate that across our western grazing lands, I think we can foresee that there would be a remarkable increase in health.
I mean, health in so many ways. I mean, as you talked about, carbon storage, water infiltration, recharging of our aquifers, and also just proliferation of native plants.
Yes. And we know how important biodiversity is in all aspects of our lives. And that is really, truly what we're seeing with this work. In addition to being more productive, then, we are directly affecting and improving the livelihood of rangeland managers. Sally did such a lovely job of showing the deep connection of ranchers and land managers to the land they work on. And we know historically how challenging that has been with isolation and with the economic challenges. And with better management, there is also this potential, and we have seen it, where you can have a better bottom line on your ranching operation. And that's pretty exciting. Not that it doesn't take a lot of work, but it's possible.
Well, yeah, and this book, Sally's book, is very much a book about not only the land, but the land stewards, the people who are tending the land, managing the land, with an understanding of all the things you're talking about, habitat, soil, wildlife, as part of the process of ranching. Sally, you worked on this book for 10 years, and there was a line in there, I don't have it right in front of me, but where you kind of implied that there were real changes in the way people are talking about and doing stewardship. Like there was a sense of progress. And I wondered if you could talk about that. And maybe all of you could talk about that a little bit, of what that progress looks like how land stewardship is evolving.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I first went out in 2011, it seemed to me like a new concept, the idea of holistic management and rotational grazing, and some of these methods where some people, I guess, had been doing them for a while, but I would say probably most people were just getting started in it. And so over the years, I noticed that, well, actually, when I went to do the book, I had to go back out and shoot. And so I noticed that there are so many more people now involved in holistically managed grazing plans and all sorts of different methods that they're utilizing to save water, to rotate the pastures so that there are healthier land, healthier animals. And so I was really inspired by that, to see that change, and also to see the number of young people that have started to come back onto the land, thanks probably to programs like what Julie has been working on over the years. That was really amazing to see that.
Yeah, Julie, I wondered if you could talk about that, what it's like working with young people. It seems like there's quite a diversity of young people who want to enter the field of agriculture and ranching specifically.
Yeah, I would say that that's true. One of the things that I've seen is that, at least in the new Agrarian program through the Quivira Coalition, the majority of the people who come are people who did not grow up in agriculture and often didn't grow up in rural landscapes. And I think what they're realizing in the face of climate change and social disenfranchisement and all sorts of issues that we're all facing is that they really want their lives to make a difference. And one of the ways they see to do that is sort of merge their love of the land and their love of the planet with actually doing something extremely utilitarian and useful, which is growing food and growing it in a way that really is respectful of people and place. So in our program, I would say that the majority of people are coming, they have fresh eyes, and that's part of the value that they bring to the land stewards who have been on the land for a while. And then larger outside of our program, across this country and in Canada too, the number of programs that are apprenticeship programs, that are farm incubator programs, internship programs for people, whether it's urban farming or working with refugee communities. It's really remarkable how many young people have I think people who in the past might have gone into land management agency work or working at nature centers, they've realized that working within the food system reality as land stewards really brings together passions and a sense of purpose and really making a difference for people across the board, not just a livelihood that they like, but actually creating something that benefits other people too. So they're some of the most inspiring people I've ever been around.
I was wondering if you could think of any examples of somebody coming, a young person maybe coming with fresh eyes and showing you something that you hadn't seen yourself.
Oh, good question. I think the main thing that they do is, for a lot of the people who are mentors in our programs or people who are land stewards, they've been managing their land, working with their animals, growing things the way they grow them for decades and sometimes for generations. And I think when you have a young person come in, they ask a lot of questions. And so on the one hand, I think that can be tiring and annoying when you already have a busy, full life. But anytime somebody asks you why you do something the way you do it, it makes you have to ask yourself, well, why the heck am I doing it this way? And so to the point that Sally was making about seeing this kind of sea change starting to really happen across the board, I think the fact that we have these young people coming in with fresh eyes is part of what's regenerating the people and the people's thought processes. And as a result, that helps to regenerate the land. And I do think that there's so much in Sally's book that really demonstrates, whether it's young people who are growing up on ranches or young people who are coming into it, that it's really regenerating the thought processes and kind of that deep, deep connection to land that helps you then take on a new practice in what's actually a very unpredictable and risky livelihood.
It seems to me, and I've talked to people about this a little bit, that a lot of land stewards are close observers of nature who could probably give a lot of wildlife biologists a run for their money, especially because, you guys are there year after year after year. And I wondered if you could, maybe starting with Nancy, describe that process of being on the land over the course of years, over the course of decades, and how your powers of observation have developed.
Yes, I think that is very true, and that develops over many years. I grew up on the land and was very comfortable with being outside, riding horses out long distances, my own time, a lot of solitary time. And I think that kind of background inspires the observation that you're talking about, and also the comfort in a world and a lifestyle like that. And definitely improves the acuity of our observational skills and building those over time. I was just telling someone this morning a story of how I had heard at the ranch some ruckus going on outside the door, and I went out to see, and a hawk had captured a pinon jay and was wrestling with it. So I watched it for a little while, and it kept dragging it further and further. And all of a sudden, a bobcat swept in and stole it from the hawk. And these little dramas that happen. I mean, you have to be open to them. You have to be aware, and you have your senses lively, I would say. And what a treasure, really, to have experiences like that. I would add to Julie's description of the young people, both who come from ranching backgrounds and those who are new to it. What I've observed, and we had 3 apprentices at our ranch over 3 years, is not only a desire for deep connection to the land, but almost a meditative aspect of these young people. Not that they don't have challenges. Anybody who's still in their 20s and is facing life wherever is going to have challenges, but they are willing to be with themselves. And many of them, it turns out, are writers and artists. And I think they are looking for a space in this crazy world of ours today to find that. And it's just something I've seen. And it keeps bringing them back into relationship with the land. And that's been my experience for myself as well.
Sally, I was wondering if you could talk about how working on this book for the long period of time that you did changed your powers of observation and maybe some of the sort of more exciting adventures you've had doing the book.
Well, I think being a photographer in general makes you be a good observer, because that's what you do most of the time. You are observing everything that's going on around you. But I think when you get out on the land and you have no distractions, you're sometimes miles and miles away from anything else. It forces you to focus on where you are and what you're looking at. And one thing that I found was pretty interesting with our grasslands, particularly out on the eastern plains in New Mexico and Colorado, and it's just a sea of grass. And people would look at it and they would say, well, that's just grass. But if you really look at it and you look deeply at it, you'll find there's all kinds of things going on in that grassland. And so for me, that was really important for me to understand that and to see that, and it was very engaging to be out there and to be in that world.
What were some of the things that you saw when you looked closely at the grass?
Well, for one thing, I went out at night to do spotting with some biologists, and I was shocked to see how many spiders there were. Just hundreds and hundreds of spiders, and their little eyes were shining bright red. And the whole idea of the prairie dogs, they make a home for the burrowing owl when they leave. So the symbiotic relationship amongst all these different plants and animals was really fascinating. And I probably, if I hadn't had somebody show me and tell me about it, I may not have really even seen it. So I would say that those were some really, really great experiences that I had on the land.
Another thing that stood out in this book, I mean, Nancy, you have an essay in which you talk about community, and there's so many organizations and people working on land health. I mean, the Quivira Coalition, Western Landowners Alliance, Nature Conservancy, Audubon Society, Southwest Grassfed, Holistic Management. I mean, and then, land managers, government people, scientists, hydrologists, wildlife biologists, fire experts, technology people. There's a picture of people doing robotics in there. It's a whole ecosystem in itself of people who are playing a role. And I was wondering if maybe each of you could talk a little bit about some of the folks you've worked with or observed, the kind of things they're doing that are helping land health.
Well, I can start with that. I had the good fortune soon after I took over management of our ranch, after my father died, to meet at a Quivira conference Kirk Gadzia, who is a rangeland advisor. He subsequently came out and worked with us on our ranch for over 20 years. And twice a year he would come out and advise us really on large scale on grassland management, pasture management, planning for our animals for that year, economic management of our work, how our grass-fed program fit into our larger program. And one thing that was very fascinating was just to have an outside pair of eyes over an extended period of time like that, reflecting back what we were doing, asking questions, probing, challenging. That can be very valuable to a land manager. And I'm very much in his debt for providing that for such a time frame. And then more recently, as the Ranney Ranch was the pilot ranch for the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, and as part of that, once a year we would have a team of ornithologists come out, and actually 2 people live on the ranch for about 3 weeks to study our bird populations. And that was, I've always been a birder my whole life, so I thought I knew the birds on our place, but it was eye-opening to me what they saw, the vantages they offered, the suggestions they had for work that we might do. Really remarkable what an outside pair of eyes can offer you. And it's extra work. It's a challenge. There are wonderful programs out there, funding sources. They are hard to access, they're hard to learn about, and we need help. But in the long run, many of these are worth it and inspiring as well for the work we're doing.
What about you, Julie?
I can kind of tag team on what Nancy said. We've had the good fortune to work with Kirk Gadzia, and also we're an Audubon certified ranch, so same experience of working with the ornithologists, and not only learning from them, but when they were doing our initial habitat survey, there were some errors in the plant community that they thought we had, and so there were errors in who the birds should be, and we were able to successfully work with them and our local NRCS range ecologist, who's a specialist in this area, and actually help strengthen the program by helping them ground truth information that they were getting from satellite maps. So I think that kind of partnership where not only are they coming in and kind of overseeing us, but working with people who are really, as you were saying earlier, who are really willing to be respectful of people who may not have a college degree, but have been on the land their whole lives or for several generations and actually have deep knowledge of a place. I'd say another partnership that's been really valuable for us in recent years has been our local soil scientist, Patrick O'Neill, and working closely with him. And one of the things that I think he's done, and I've heard him say this now at many workshops, I think this is an idea that's starting to really take hold, which is ranchers have a tendency to look ahead, like what's the feed ahead of me? What can I do with what's coming up? But it's just as important to look behind and look at what we're leaving behind, because that's what's going to feed the soil. And that it's also really critically important to not only be looking at your land health and monitoring it on the surface, but actually going out and digging holes and really looking at what's going on deeply. And again, I think Sally's book touches on that. And I think that soil health story is something that's really helping to bring more and more people into realization that these regenerative practices may not put money in your pocket for the first 2 or 4 or 5 years, but over time, they make a tremendous difference in the capacity of your land to be resilient. And that's certainly something we've found. George started doing holistic management and working with Alan Savory in the 1980s. And the resiliency of the properties that have been managed that long in that way in the face of what have been some crippling droughts in our area is really remarkable. And I think those stories can be really inspiring, and those grow out of those partnerships.
So have you found that your ranch is more resilient and is infiltrating water and has healthier soil because of these practices?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the things that's been going on in our valley recently has been some very serious groundwater regulations coming in. There's a lot of crop circles, irrigation circles here, and that's definitely impacted surface flows. And so there's been a lot of legislation and voluntary retiring of irrigation. And one of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to use significantly less water than a lot of other people, because at this point the plant community is so biologically diverse that no matter how dry it is or how wet it is, there's always something that's able to grow. So we don't ever have bare ground. That gets back to Nancy's point about the value of biodiversity. But also now that in this valley, anybody who's irrigating has to pay for every acre foot of water. For some people, that means that the cost of your property taxes has gone from $3,000 a year to $20,000 a year. That's a crippling change in the economics of livestock operation, and not needing to use all that water may actually be the thing that saves a ranch. So I think that, again, that's not something that happens overnight, but you have to start somewhere.
Sally, one of the photographs in your book is a wind turbine, and I wondered if you could talk about some of those new initiatives that are going on, like wind farms on ranches. How does that work out for everyone? I mean, we know that big energy companies, even if it's renewable energy, those guys don't necessarily, they're self-interested. So how does that work out for the ranchers?
Well, just from my experience with a couple of the ranchers that I visited down in central New Mexico, near Corona, in that area, where there is a massive transmission line and wind energy program underway, it's actually helping some of the ranchers because they lease those turbines back to the companies and can make a very significant profit from that. So it is enabling them to hold on to their land, especially in circumstances where they may not be able to do that. So from that standpoint, it is helping the ranchers. In addition to that, they can still manage their cattle as they did before. So it doesn't impact how the grazing practices occur. So it really is a win-win for the ranchers. They seem to be benefiting from it. The cattle are benefiting, and the land is being managed the same way it was before in terms of the people that were managing holistically. So that's been my experience with the few different places that I've been able to see.
There's a nice essay in the book by Bob Budd, and he mentions creating a market for ecology. What would that, or does that, look like, and what do you all see as the potential there?
Well, I think he was referring to, we think of ranches in terms of economics versus ecology. So his essay is talking all about biodiversity and the importance of realizing that everything is connected. And if you take one piece out, everything, it affects everything. And so I think he was trying to say that it's important for us to consider the ecology of the land and the biodiversity of the land. And if we can come collectively to a thought process that incorporates those viewpoints into how we manage the land, that it will be better for everybody. And I think that's what he was referring to.
I was wondering if it was also about paying for ecosystem services.
I can speak to that a little bit. Yes, that idea has been around for so long. I remember in school in the 60s and 70s talking about compensation for ecosystem services. And I don't think we're there yet, but it's certainly become a more known and palatable idea. There is so much that privately held land in this country has to offer. And much of the West is still privately held. And so when we do have healthy management, we are offering these services of water retention, coming back to healthy aquifers, and again, the carbon, which we are now seeing some markets for. It's not clear how much that does for us. We personally weren't involved in one yet. It's sort of touch and go, but it's definitely here, and some people are doing them. So I think the state of Wyoming is spearheading some work in this arena, and I think it's here, but definitely private land management has a lot to offer in the realm of ecosystem services.
And I think recently, too, I think that Wyoming has worked out a plan with USDA for the wildlife corridors so that they are hopefully compensated for allowing wildlife to move through their land and be compensated for anything that happens to their own livestock in that regard, like running into a fence or being killed or whatever. So that's the ranchers being paid is also something that's fairly new, I believe, that they haven't been compensated for that in the past. And there's some chance that will happen soon, hopefully.
I would just add that, just to tag on to Sally's thoughts about the wind developments across much of the Central and Rocky Mountain West now. Our ranch was in an area that was found to be one of the most wind productive in the country in about 2007. And we had an experience that was very interesting, and I would highly recommend to other ranchers and land managers that we came together as a group of ranch owners to learn about the various projects, to interview different companies so we knew what they were offering in terms of the economic drivers and also in terms of what the impacts would be on the land. And I can only recommend that land managers do more of this. So because there are significant impacts, particularly in terms of road construction when a wind development is put in. To my mind, the turbines are almost the least of it, but you can very negatively impact the hydrology and the functioning of a grassland ecosystem with the whole road network. And that can be done in a better way. And if these groups of landowners come together in this way, there is also the potential for working to demand or request some compensation for ecosystem services as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of networking that can be done here that it's not easy to do in far-flung ranching communities, but definitely a possibility for our future.
Yeah, I'm really struck by, looking at this book and reading this book. There's a little bit, I think, of kind of myth busting going on, and one of them is the myth of the self-sufficient rural people. I mean, you show a picture of people who are so much in community with one another. So, Sally, let's go back to you. And I mean, this is a book not only of, Down to Earth is obviously a podcast about regenerative agriculture, but I want to make sure we talk about the art. I mean, what were some of the aesthetic considerations for you in making the photographs of this book? One thing that I'll say stood out to me was the colors. There's a real capturing of these beautiful muted colors of the desert Southwest. But I was wondering if you could talk about the book from your perspective as an artist.
Well, that's true. The colors, when I look at the landscape, that's what I see. I can see the browns and the tans and the oranges. And so I wanted to reflect what I saw, and that's why the colors are relatively muted. I've had a number of people mention that to me, but that was intentional to do it that way because I think that represents, in my way of thinking, the land. I think one of the hardest things in terms of putting a book together like this was because I was on so many different landscapes to try to make it flow so that you're not jolted when you turn a page and you see one image looking so different than the other. And sometimes those images did look very different. So I had to really keep that in mind when I was shooting. A lot of times I didn't shoot in the summertime because I didn't really want all that green grass. And people would say, well, you need to come back in the summer when it's green. And I did some of that, but for the most part, it was in the fall and in the spring. And that wasn't necessarily intentional, but it was when the ranchers seemed to have the time for me to come out and visit them. But the other challenge was these are vast landscapes. They are huge. And to try to portray that in a photograph is difficult. So, I tried to have something in the foreground just to give depth perception so that you have a sense of, yes, this is really huge because that cow is only like an inch high. So, I was trying to keep those things in mind as well. The other thing, I don't have a lot of portraiture in the book. That was intentional too, because I wanted the people to be part of the landscape. It was about them being on the land with the land. And so rather than capturing their faces like what you normally see in a lot of these types of books, ranching books, I wanted them to show them on the land doing the work. And they were part of the land, just as the animals and the plants and everything else.
I love that. I really appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted to tag on to that I do think that the grasslands of the Intermountain West have a really subtle beauty and a subtle magic. And so for a lot of people, they think there's nothing here. They think that it's a bland or all the same. And one of the things that I think the photography in the book does is it really does demonstrate that there are these sort of absolutely marvelous little moments of beauty in what is otherwise often a very bleak and harsh place to be out there working, and that the book really captured that. Like I felt like I was seeing the place that I live and work in as I went through the book. And I think it's hard for people to want to capture the fact that what's here is scarcity and what's the beauty of the scarcity. And I think the book captures that.
Thank you.
And there's so many photographs, not only of the grasslands and the cattle, but also bison, horses, dogs, insects, birds, so many life forms and people, as you say, in the landscape, not just portraits separate from the landscape, which I think is a really profound statement of people's role in this. And I'm really glad that you handled it that way. I think it's probably a good time to wrap up. What have I not asked that any of the three of you would like to talk about before we go?
Well, I would like to speak a little bit more about what I think all of us recognize as a primary challenge to this way of life, and I'll just open it and Julie can speak a little more, is the idea of land succession. We are really in a challenging time where land prices are escalating rapidly. These kinds of landscapes, we're almost at a time when they're only available to very wealthy individuals who've made their living elsewhere and who want to appreciate and share this beauty, nonetheless are from another way of life. And it's very difficult for the next generation, whether it be the generation on the land from the ranch family or newcomers who are interested in land management, to get on the land. And happily, there are programs to assist this now. I mean, there are the apprenticeship programs, which Julie has talked about. There are land link programs in a number of the western states that help owners, and many ranchers are coming to retirement age who are helping them transfer their land either within family to make that economically viable or to outside interested parties. And this is beginning to happen more across the board. Nonetheless, it is a huge challenge.
Well, and I think part of that challenge, and it's certainly something we're seeing, we have over 125 graduates now from the new Agrarian program. Some of those are people who are 15 years out. You know, they're definitely ready and have the skill set to be in a position to own their own operation, if not their own land, the economics of the livestock industry are such that it's really almost impossible to make a living. And often you have to be running at such a scale that some of the kinds of management we're talking about can be really challenging to do. And so one of the things that I'm seeing is that we have a generation that's ready and willing and eager to be involved. But when they think about how am I going to raise a family? How am I, completely apart from ever owning the land, just the economic reality of running a ranch right now, even for people who own the land, is extremely difficult. And I think it's a little sobering. It's not a story we all want to talk about. But I think this gets back to whether it's valuing ecological services or something, but we don't tend to value the people who grow food, and we don't tend to value our food in this country, and we don't value the land that we need to grow our food. And so I think that continuing to try to figure out a way to reach people who aren't immersed in that world and help them understand how necessary it is and valuable it is might help us start to shift the economic picture, which so devalues those things that there really isn't a livelihood for that next generation. And I think books like Sally's, which aren't coming at somebody, hitting them over the head with a doom and gloom message, but is really trying to evoke all of the reasons why this matters, is one of the ways to maybe help that story get beyond the small circle of people who are actually out there doing that work.
Thank you, Julie. It's well said. Thank you.
Sally, was there anything that you wanted to add before we go?
Well, I would just, to tag along with this thought, getting back to the importance of organizations and people that are helping ranchers. And in terms of succession, I have one ranch in particular, that the Red Ranch, which sits right against the Moab and the Canyonlands in Utah, a spectacular property, and they were about to lose the land. And 20 years ago, I think they worked out a deal with the Nature Conservancy so that when they pass on, that land will be left in a trust that the Nature Conservancy will, I guess, manage. And they're already doing that now. They have a research station on the land. So that's not necessarily the way many situations turn out, but it is one way that some of the land is being set aside so that it doesn't get split up and developed. It's one alternative.
The book is called Homeground by Sally Thomson, who is an artist and photographer. You can find the book and find out more about her work at sallythomsonphotography.com, and Thomson is spelled Thomson. sallythomsonphotography.com. And by the way, Christmas and holidays are coming up. This could make a beautiful gift. And we've also been joined by ranchers Nancy Ranney and Julie Sullivan. Thank you all so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.